Hello, I'm Lisa Francis, and I'm reporting for NB Media Co-op from Elsie Bookcook.
And I'm David Gordon Koch, reporting from Moncton.
We're on the line today with journalist Bruce Wark in Sackville. He is a retired CBC reporter and journalism professor who is still reporting and now publishes his own work on his website, worktimes.com. Thanks for joining us today, Bruce.
Good to be with you.
Lately, he's been doing in-depth coverage of NB Power's controversial plans for a new power plant in the Tantramar area, about 20 kilometers north of Sackville. There are many aspects of this story. Today, we wanted to talk with him about some of the latest developments and other issues, including opposition from Indigenous communities, including Elsie Bookcook, and his experience covering the story.
First of all, you've just published a new article about hearings that took place yesterday at New Brunswick's energy regulator, the Energy and Utilities Board, about the project. Your article states that NB Power is trying to avoid the regulator's financial scrutiny. This can get a bit technical, but can you talk about why these hearings are taking place?
Well, NB Power did apply to the Energy and Utilities Board to avoid a full-scale public hearing. Under New Brunswick's Electricity Act, capital projects worth more than $50 million must be approved by the EUB. And New Brunswick Power is arguing that no, this is not a capital project. This is a project that is being built and operated by an American company, and therefore NB Power is not, building a capital project worth more than $50 million, and therefore it should not have to get EUB approval for this project. That's their argument before the board.
So normally there would be a review by the EUB for any capital project over $50 million, worth over $50 million. But NB Power is basically arguing that it shouldn't take place this time because this Texas-based company, ProEnergy, would be building and would be effectively the owner of the plant. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right, David. They will be the owner. They'll operate it. NB Power will buy the power from the plant over a 25-year agreement, a leasing agreement. And therefore, NB Power is saying, it's not our project. It's a large project. It's one of the largest in recent years in New Brunswick. But they're saying, no, it's not our project. And therefore, we should not have to get approval from the Energy and Utilities Board.
So a lot of this comes down to whether this project is considered an NB Power capital project or not, correct?
That's right. And you know that the public intervener, who is the energy watchdog for New Brunswick, is arguing before the board that no, the NB Power should need to get the approval of the board because this is a large project and there are elements of it. For instance, there will be a piece of equipment, a large piece of equipment called a switch yard that will have to be installed. ProEnergy, the American company, will do that. It will cost $70 million to install it so that the plant can be connected to the grid. But New Brunswick Power will then buy that plant from ProEnergy for $1. And then that plant will be part of New Brunswick's capital assets. And so the public intervener is saying, well, look, that's a more than $50 million project. Therefore, you should need to get approval for a thing like that. That is the counter argument to what NB Power is saying.
And who is it that considers like the energy utility boards that what is a capital project? Like who else determines that?
Well, it's under the Electricity Act. It's Section 107.1 of the Electricity Act in New Brunswick that says, and here's the problem, it says capital projects worth $50 million or more must be approved by the board after a full public hearing. But here's the catch. the legislation does not define what a capital project is. And
Mhm.
so that leaves the door open for NB Power to say, well, this is not a capital project. This is a leasing agreement with a private company. It's a partnership.
Mhm.
And therefore, we don't need the approval of the board. And I have to tell you, Leisha, during yesterday's hearing, the panel hearing the arguments seemed to be at least partially sympathetic to NB Power's argument. But now the other side of this is we're all customers of New Brunswick Power. We're ratepayers. And the concern from various individuals and groups who are appearing before the EUB, including the public intervener, the concern is the financial implications for NB Power's customers. If this project does not work out and it ends up costing a lot of money, NB Power will have to get that money from ratepayers, from you and me who pay the bills. And so therefore, that's why this is crucial that this be decided, because it will have an effect on NB Power customers.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so your article states that the hearings continue on Friday. I believe Mo Qureshi of the Conservation Council is slated to appear. And is there anything that you can tell us about what's expected from this hearing tomorrow, which Friday, September 5th? And when is the EUB expected to make its decision on this?
Yeah, tomorrow will be oral arguments. What we were hearing before was just affidavit evidence from various accountants who were arguing over whether this is a capital project or not. And once again, under international financial reporting standards, there's no definition of capital project. So one expert is saying it's not a capital project. The other expert is saying it should be considered a capital project. So we went through that yesterday. Tomorrow at the Energy and Review Board or Utilities Board, there will be oral arguments. You mentioned Mo Qureshi of the Conservation Council of New Brunswick, the public intervener, NB Power, the smaller municipal utilities in New Brunswick will all make oral arguments about whether this project should be subject to review by the Energy and Utilities Board or not. That's what we're expecting. After that, it's anybody's guess how quickly a decision will be made. But I'll just say that NB Power wants it sooner rather than later because they need to get ahead on this project, which they're hoping to bring online by 2028. And it's a lot of work to be done to get that deadline met. And so there's pressure on the EUB to make a quick decision.
And do you know if calls to action was approached in any way? Like for the calls to action with excuse me, with the indigenous people, how we're supposed to be considered for big projects now concerning environment. Do you know if that was at all brought up to bring the consultation?
Yeah, not at the EUB. That is not a factor there. What the EUB is doing is strictly looking at, well, do we need that question? Do we need to review this project as a capital project worth more than $50 million? The issue of the effect on the environment, the effect on Indigenous people and land title rights and all of those things, those issues are not part of that hearing. So they are very important issues, of course, to other parties. This story has so many aspects. They're important to environmentalists, they're important to the Mi'kmaq, they're important to Elsipogtog, but at the EUB hearing, they're not a factor in this. They're deciding a relatively narrow question. But certainly the issue of participation of Indigenous partners in this is a very important aspect of this story. And so far, there is no real participation.
And can you talk more about why this is important? In other words, what happens if the EUB conducts a review of this project?
Well, if they do, then that will look into the financial implications of the project for ratepayers potentially. Is this a good deal for NB Power? Is it a good deal for the province? Will it work? In other words, will a gas plant, a big fossil fuel plant that will cost, it could cost $1.4 billion for all we know. One in Manitoba costs that much. Will that be good for NB Power? And that's the issue that will have to be decided. Outside of that, however, of course, we have to figure out, will it be good for the environment? Will it be good for the ecology of the sensitive Chignecto Isthmus, that land bridge between New Brunswick and Nova Scotia? Will it be good for Indigenous land titles claims? All of those issues are separate issues that have to be decided as part of the environmental assessment review process that is already underway. The Impact Assessment Agency of Canada, a federal regulator, has been inviting comments, and it has asked the American company ProEnergy to comment on those comments, to respond to them. And so far, the comment, it's received 271 comments. All of them, almost all of them, all but a couple, are overwhelmingly against this project. So the American company ProEnergy will have to respond to the federal regulator. At the same time, we're talking about an environmental assessment review. There are some, including the Green MLA Megan Mitten, who are calling for a comprehensive environmental assessment, which would lengthen the process and mean that at every stage that Indigenous people and others would have to be consulted. And that would slow the project down a lot. So we're waiting to see whether the federal regulator, whether the provincial regulators decide on a comprehensive environmental review. At the moment, though, it doesn't look like they'll go there.
Now, would that only come if it's deemed a capital project or not?
No, that is quite separate. And that's the separate part of this, that NB Power and ProEnergy will have to deal with that. Whether it's a capital project or not, that is a fairly narrow question. And the broader questions of the environmental review are the bigger issue that I think will have to be worked out if the federal regulator and the province order more comprehensive reviews. But I should tell you that there is a third aspect to this, and that's a Mi'kmaq environmental review. That has been announced. The chiefs have announced that they will want that, and that they expect it to be thorough, and that anything that's identified as a problem will have to be dealt with. And then, of course, whether the project goes ahead or not, well, that question will have to be answered.
Bruce, when we were talking off camera before this interview, we were sort of discussing how there's so many dimensions to this story, as you've kind of laid out briefly just now. And some of this is highly technical. The language is hard to decipher for a layperson. Can you comment on this dimension, the obscurity of the language and in this story?
Well, in a way, I wake up in the middle of the night sometimes and think, what this story is about? It's all about language. Yesterday at the EUB, we have the lawyers talking legal language, and then we had the accountants talking financial reporting standards, and that's one whole level of language in this. Then there's the language of the environmental groups and what they are talking about in terms of ecology, in terms of sensitivity of the environment, in terms of land and animals and things like that. Then there are the Indigenous rights issues as well. with language around that is important. So that on every, we had a public hearing here in Sackville not long ago. And at that hearing, the language was all technical about the need for this plant in technical terms, in terms of stabilizing the grid and synchronous condensing technologies and aspects like that. So you've got all of these kind of language issues and jargon and all of those things mixed in here, so that it makes it a very interesting story to cover, but it's also very daunting at times.
Okay, so the next question, let's talk about your experience covering the larger story. First, you are a resident of Sackville. How did you first, or when did you first hear that this project was coming?
Well, I remember vividly. It was July 19th. It was my birthday, and I was drinking a tea in bed with my partner, Laura, and she said, "Have you seen this letter from Barry Rothfuss? He's the executive director of the Atlantic Wildlife Institute, which is just a few kilometers from where we live." And so she read it to me. It was on Facebook. And right away, I said, "Oh my God, I've got to do a story on this." We were going to celebrate my birthday in Ontario. We were leaving the very next day. And I thought, oh, it's my birthday, but I have to do this story before I go because it's such a big story locally. So I ran downstairs. I called up Barry Rothfuss at the Atlantic Wildlife Institute, and I said, "Can I come over there right away? I want to talk to you." And he said, "Sure, come on." And so I went. I went to the Atlantic Wildlife Institute in Midgec. I talked to him, and then I raced back home and wrote a story and filed it online on July 19th, my birthday, because I was leaving town the next day to go to Ontario. And that's when I became aware of this and realized that it was a big story. And while I was in Ontario, I kept monitoring things and putting comments on my site and monitoring the comments being made to the federal regulators, so that when I came back 10 days later, I was ready to write more stories on it.
Is there any support for this project whatsoever, or could you elaborate on the level of opposition locally?
Well, I've covered a lot of stories, and usually, as you know, David, there are two sides to everything, at least two sides, and sometimes more. In this case, the local opposition is overwhelming. I can't state that strongly enough. People just do not want this gas plant around here because the isthmus is so important. Ecologically, there are horse farms nearby. And people don't want it, and they don't see why it should be here in such a sensitive place. So it is overwhelming opposition. The mayor of Tantramar, which, you know, the town of Tantramar, this project will be in the town, within the town limits. He has taken the position that he's going to let the environmental impact assessment process work its way through before he comes out against it. But he has been calling for a comprehensive environmental review, and the MLA has been really vociferously opposing this project. So the leadership are leaning toward opposition or are strongly opposed, and everybody else here seems to be pretty well opposed to it. The question for me is that significant enough really to deter NB Power and the American company? And I'm not sure it is.
Yeah, it often seems like projects like this are sort of on rails, that some of these procedures are merely formalities, not trying to breed too much cynicism here. It remains to be seen how this will pan out. But yeah. Any comment on that?
Well, yeah, it is true that people here are very much afraid that the fix is in on this, that the thing is going to go ahead and that there's not going to be a comprehensive environmental impact assessment, and that NV Power, which is saying we need this project to avoid blackouts on the grid. They're using that language because they have to integrate renewables, wind and solar, which aren't always producing electricity. And in order to integrate them, they say they need this natural gas plant, which will be backed up by diesel as well. And so they're saying that to avoid blackouts, we need this access to this power, and we need it quickly. We've got to get it up and running by 2028, and there's not much time. So there is fear here that that kind of should I say scare tactics, but that kind of position of NB Power will push the project through. That's the concern here. However, there are those here who believe, and people who are knowledgeable, more knowledgeable than I am, that the demand for an Indigenous review of this project will slow it up considerably, that the government will not be able to ignore that, and that especially with land title claims and everything like that, that in fact, that may be what holds it up and allows for sober second thought, if you will. I'm thinking back now, I wasn't here then, but think back to 2013 when there was so much protest in Elsipogtog and among environmentalists who speak English and environmentalists who speak French in New Brunswick. They were very much opposed to fracking. And the police got involved. It was very violent. They raided the encampment. It was quite a scene. But in the end, the opponents of the fracking prevailed. They won. And whether this rises to that level, I don't know. It's early days to say that yet, but it is true that the project would use fracked gas that will be piped from Alberta through the States. And as we know, in New Brunswick, there is considerable opposition to fracking. So that's another element of this that is unpredictable, but it may dissuade New Brunswick Power, the government, and Pro Energy from putting this plant here burning fracked natural gas. You know, I should add that many people here have come up with many alternatives, saying that what we need maybe is battery storage to back up the wind and the solar. Maybe what we need is what they call demand management. Talk about technical terms again, getting people to use less power, changing the power rates so that you can use power at night when it's cheaper, and then lessening demand on the grid and reducing the pressure to produce more power all the time. So those aspects are important too. NB Power right now is undergoing a review because of rising power rates and a lot of public dissatisfaction with that, and a lot of pressure from the government. So that is in the background here. I haven't linked it to this story yet, but it's certainly an avenue worth pursuing. How the review of the formal review of New Brunswick Power will work into this larger issue of opposition to this project, where people around here at least are just not happy.
So you were removed from a public meeting about this project after you took a photo. Can you give us details about that?
Well, it was an open house that was held by Pro Energy, the American company, and they had been asked by the mayor and the MLA to allow the public to come and ask questions for a couple of hours, and they would answer them. And the company was at first reluctant to do that, but they finally agreed. But when we got to the session, they said no recording, no audio recording, no cameras, no video recording. You can take notes and that's it. And it makes it very hard to do the story when you're at a 2-hour meeting and you can't do any recordings and you can't take photos. It certainly rules out TV coverage and radio coverage. And also for me, it makes it difficult to get things on the record, to figure out, you're scribbling your notes as fast as you can. And so that made me very angry that they were, in this day and age, going to allow us to ask questions, but not going to allow us to record them so that we could report them. And so I agreed. I didn't take pictures. I didn't record the meeting. I sat there and took notes. But at the end of the meeting, you have to remember this is a meeting that is in a municipal public space, the Civic Center in Sackville. I went up and took a photo of the MLA, who had been very eloquent in asking questions and making statements right at the end of the meeting. And I thought, I'm going to get a photo of her because that's part of this story. In fact, it's a big part of this story. And so I took a photo, and a security guard came right over, said, no photos, no photo. And I'm afraid I was very angry and said, look, I used some 4-letter words, and he said, okay, I'm going to have to escort you out of here. And I said, fine, I'll go, and did go. But before that, I had specifically asked the president of Pro Energy Canada to allow me to do recording and take pictures, and he said no then. So I was pretty angry that they would hold a public meeting but not give us the tools with which to cover it. I guess the company can set rules. They were renting the space. At the same time, are those rules reasonable? I would say they're not reasonable. And why the restriction? What are they afraid of? Why can't we report what is going on there? Why can't we record what is going on there so that we have a record of what is said by the company, by NB Power, by the government was there, the health department, the environment department was there. So why can't we have all that? And especially in this space, they had rented the space, but it's used all the time for meetings in the municipality, and we cover them. I'm used to going there and covering all candidates' meetings and covering other public meetings. And suddenly, with a project of this size and this importance and this controversial, suddenly they're trying to restrict access. And they say, oh, we're trying to protect people's privacy. Well, I don't believe that. I think that they're just trying to elude transparency. They're trying to restrict access to what they're doing. And that's not fair. It's not right. And I'm against that.
So with that being said, and that happening in a public office, overall, their transparency in this project, how would you rate it?
Well, not very high, Leisha, to be honest with you. Look at the financial documents. They, Pro Energy and NB Power, have signed, I didn't count the number of pages in this huge agreement. They're calling a tolling agreement. It might be 80 pages. I don't know. It's a very detailed, long document. And when you look at it, there are a lot of things that are blacked out. Practically all the financial information is blacked out. We know very little about what this project will cost, what NB Power will have to pay for the electricity. We just have words and no figures. And that is a total lack of transparency. The other thing about this is it was announced on July 14th in the middle of the summer when no one is paying attention. And all of a sudden, here it is. The land was purchased by NB Power. They've already built an access road. The thing is well advanced. And all of a sudden, they're saying, okay, you can comment for a couple of weeks, and then we're closing the comments, and that's it. And as for the information given, well, a lot of blacked out passages in documents. So, I would say, you raise the issue of transparency, I would have to say that there is not a lot of transparency here. And the fact that NB Power is trying to prevent the Energy and Utilities Board from looking into the financial aspects also indicates to me a lack of transparency.
Let's move on to the issue of Indigenous consent for this project, because this is speaking of transparency, a very interesting issue. The company Pro Energy has claimed that the gas plant, and this is a quote, will be owned by Pro Energy itself and the North Shore Mi'kmaq Tribal Council, which is an organization governed by 7 First Nations chiefs who are on their board of directors. Now, the general manager of the North Shore Mi'kmaq Tribal Council was quoted in an NB Power press release speaking approvingly of the project. But as you reported in August, those chiefs haven't actually agreed to invest in the project. Can you talk about this and how this revelation came about?
Well, yeah, that's kind of shocking, David, that we were told, not led to believe, but we were told that there would be a definite Indigenous partnership here. That in fact, Pro Energy and the North Shore Mi'kmaq Tribal Council were partners in the project. Not only that, in one document, the American company says that the site chosen near Center Village on the Chignecto Isthmus was favored by the Mi'kmaq. That was their favored site. That's what we were told. It's there in black and white. I was noticing that. I did not report it because I wondered how that could be. You put a giant fossil fuel plant in a ecological wilderness, and Indigenous people are signing off on it and saying it's okay with us. I doubted that. And so that as time went by and they held their open house, I talked to Tristan Jackson, who is with the North Shore Mi'kmaq Tribal Council. He had arranged for an option for the council to invest up to 2.5% of equity in the project. But he told me at the open house, to my surprise, that nobody had exercised that option. The chiefs had not decided whether to invest or not, and that therefore they were not partners yet. Maybe they would be, but they were not yet partners. And that came out at the public meeting, and people were shocked by that because the Premier Susan Holt herself had said she was glad to see a project in which the Mi'kmaq were partners.
Yeah. And you know, this was also reported in the CBC, for example, when news about this project came out, that it was right there in black and white that there had been consultation with the Mi'kmaq, who had, as you said, chosen this site over a previous one, I believe in Skadook. It said that this was the preferred spot. So it's like this information was released in order to perhaps build consent, to sort of manufacture consent, to borrow a phrase, for this project, rather prematurely, and you know, leading to accusations that the company itself is misleading the public. And any comment on that?
Well, yeah, it was misleading, and it makes it very hard to oppose something when it has, you know, the Indigenous people who have title to that land are saying that's great with us. We're on board. We're partners. We'll benefit financially from this. That's what it appeared to be, and then we discovered no, that's not the case at all. That in fact, the chiefs are complaining that they weren't consulted, that none of them were consulted or really brought on board with this, and certainly their communities were not. And so there's a kind of sense of outrage there, and with the chiefs pointing out that the sensitivity of all this on so many fronts, that it's traditional hunting land and traditional lands of their peoples. And here they are being told, we're all being told that they're on board with it. So now this Mi'kmaq review, the assessment review, could slow the project up, and it could be build, I'm not sure, distrust between NB Power, the Pro Energy, and the Indigenous peoples, because it was stated so plainly that they had agreed to this and were on board and had even invested in it. And it's really, perplexing that that could happen. Maybe they thought they could rush it through, and in rushing it through, this would not come out. Maybe they figured that, to give them the benefit of the doubt, that it was just a matter of signing an agreement that the Mi'kmaq would sign on. I don't know. But whatever happened, it's very clear that at the moment, the Indigenous people who were said to be partners are just not in favor of this project at this point.
Have you interviewed any of the Mi'kmaq chiefs yet, or any chiefs of any of the surrounding reserves?
Leisha, I'm glad you asked that question. I've tried, and that was what was missing from my story. The CBC was reporting the partnership. Other people were the Times and Transcript, and the New Brunswick papers were reporting that. I was reluctant to report it because nobody was talking to me. I tried to talk to Chief Rebecca Knockwood at Fort Folly, which is the closest First Nation to this project. And I could not get in touch with her. I emailed her, I phoned, and she did not call me back or email me back. I tried to talk to the Elsipogtog chief, I was told he was not available until September. So
Mhm.
I could not get anywhere with the chiefs until they started issuing press releases of their own and their own, documents. And I was very glad to get those, because I think that that states their position very clearly in a way that makes it clear that they are not in favor of this without a heck of a lot of environmental review and assessment.
Mhm. Mhm.
Now, it may be too, I should say this, the fault here lies with the white reporter in a way. I have not done a good job I've been here since 2016, which is 9 years now, going on 10 years. And I have not done a good job of going to First Nation communities and talking to people there, building up a sense of trust and contacts there.
Elsipogtog and Gopit Lodge, which is an organization that defends Indigenous rights, has also stated that they and the larger Mi'kmaq community weren't consulted about this project, contradicting these earlier claims by Pro Energy. And all this is taking place in the context of the ongoing cases regarding Indigenous title in New Brunswick. These major cases regarding Indigenous title, Mi'kmaq nations having asserted title over, generally speaking, the eastern half of the province. So how does all this relate to these ongoing title cases that are underway?
Well, I think in two ways. First of all, under environmental assessment reviews, there is what is called a duty to consult. And that means that before a project like this can go ahead, there is a duty to consult Indigenous peoples. And that was not done yet here. It will have to be done. So that's a very important factor here. The second thing, of course, is the legal question, which has been, Elsipogtog wanted a declaration of title beginning in 2016. They went for a formal process. And then last year, the other chiefs have gone for that as well. So that here you've got a massive gas plant. This is a huge facility going into an area where title is claimed. They want a declaration there. And I think that, who could agree to sign off on that if you're serious about your claim for title. That, I think, is a really unresolved question, and it's an important one. And we'll have to see how that works out. I guess it depends what the results of the environmental review on the part of the Mi'kmaq, what those results are. Um, if I find it hard to believe that there'd be a review and everybody would say, "Oh yeah, this is fine, this is great, it won't hurt the Chignecto Isthmus." I find that hard to believe, but uh, I think that the title claim is a really important aspect of this. And the fact that the duty to consult was not done, but was just said to be done, is also important, an important factor here.
With everything that's going on with the states, Trump, all of that, what what has Premier Holt actually said to the whole thing concerning us, concerning the states, concerning this kind of agreement, like you're saying, feeling like it's out of the blue?
Yeah, well, you know what? That's something I haven't said, but lurking in the background here among the opponents of this is the fact that it's an American company and we're in a trade war with the US. Premier Holt did address that question during a CBC interview. She said, look, all this happened. NB Power went out for a request for proposals before this trade war happened, before Trump was elected again. And they decided on this company was the very best company. There was no qualified Canadian company. And therefore, it was a done deal before all this trade war erupted. So she tried to say, you know, okay, it's an American company, but there are no qualified Canadian companies, and therefore we have to live with this. I'm still hearing from people here that they're very unhappy, that it should be a Canadian project at the very least, and that it's just not acceptable to go with an American company in the midst of this tariff trade war with Trump.
What has Susan or Premier Holt said since the chiefs have come out with their own statements?
A good question. I'm trying to get a hold of her. Every week, Susan Holt puts out on Facebook. It's great that she does this. She talks about her weekly schedule, and I'm watching that. I want to get time to go and find out where she is. Like if she has a meeting somewhere, I'll go there because I want to ask her now. I don't think, to be fair to her, that she really realized that when she said the Mi'kmaq were on board, that they weren't. I think she'd been told that. So to be fair to her, I would like to talk to her again and have a good relationship with her. She's always answered my questions whenever I've interviewed her, and I have faith that she will again. I just have to get to it and find her and find out what she knows now and what she's saying now about that issue of whether this has support. And now that we know it doesn't have the support, automatic support of the Indigenous people, what her position is on it. She's in a tough spot. I mean, NB Power is a Crown corporation, it's independent, and she's not the head of it. On the other hand, she is premier of the province, and she is on record as saying something that didn't turn out to be true. So that I think it's worth finding her and asking her about that and seeing what she says now. Because one thing I have always found with her in my dealings with her is that she is willing to answer any question you ask. And that is not true of many, many politicians.
Just before we wrap up, I just want to talk briefly about the source of energy itself, gas, natural gas, from this Maritimes and Northeast pipeline. And this is said to be gas derived from fracking, including the shale gas fields near Sussex, but also the United States, where I believe most of the natural gas is derived from fracking. that's produced in the United States, and perhaps all the way from Alberta. You mentioned this earlier in the interview. Just can you talk about how do we know where this gas comes from, and under what conditions it's being produced? Because it seems like a bit of a puzzle trying to track where this gas comes from through the kind of maze or network of pipelines and so on in North America.
Well, at the public hearing, we had the question and answer session. Matt Gorman of NB Power, who really, he does know a lot. He knows a lot of the technical aspects of things. He pointed out, I think it was him, or it might have been an official from Pro Energy, pointed out that the gas comes from Alberta, it is frack gas, and comes through the States in this pipeline, although there may be other gas, American gas, mixed with it. What some of the environmental opponents are saying is that when you use gas like this, you have to calculate the environmental effects of the fracking wherever it takes place, and then leakages in the pipeline, the methane leakages, and methane is much more damaging environmentally than CO2. And so you have to factor all that in. But that issue of the American gas, the frack gas, certainly has come up again and again. And I recall that Susan Holt did say something that the opponents of the project disagree with, but that it hasn't really been fully answered yet. And that is that if you've got a gas plant, and you've got power shortages, the gas plant can be brought on very quickly, within 10 minutes, and it can run indefinitely. Whereas, say, if you have battery backup, the battery may only last for 4 hours, or even for 10 hours or 16 hours, depending on how much power you're using. But at the public meeting here in Sackville, Landon Tesmer of Pro Energy said it's no good for 4 hours if you need it continuously for 4 days. And so and Susan Holt said that too. So that is one aspect of this, a technical aspect of this story that bears looking into. Would battery storage really be adequate backup or not? And certainly the two sides here are very far apart on that.
We've been talking to Bruce Wark, journalist and publisher of the New Wark Times. You can check it out at warktimes.com. Thanks so much for speaking to us today, Bruce.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed talking to you.